Now I see a live.
Okay, we're live.
That's exciting. Yeah. How's everybody doing? Good to see you, Terry. Good to see you, Rob. How's everyone doing?
I'm awesome. I'm in my autumnal colors.
Yes.
And yes, being a professor at McGill University right now is an awesome thing to be, as
Mm,
well as here with you guys talking about
yes.
this week in higher ed.
Awesome. Dr. Terry Gibbons, everyone. You really don't need any introduction, Terry, but thank you for doing that. And then uh, Rob Gibson, I know you mainly through your voluminous and on point LinkedIn feed, which folks who, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, what Rob does there is definitely something to check out. But Rob, you can introduce yourself and you got a lot of different hats you wear and have worn, and I'm sure folks will enjoy hearing from you.
Oh, thank you for it. Well, Mike and Terry, it's just a delight to be with you today and to spend some time and visit. I think we did this few months ago now. I can't remember when the last time was. Maybe a year or two ago. I can't remember now. But
the time is fluid.
It was within the COVID years. It was within the COVID years. So
That's
it's
right,
all
yeah.
blurring together a little. Yeah.
Just real briefly, I'm the Director of Learning Technologies at Emporia State University. It's a small regional university in the Midwest, teachers college primarily. We crank out a lot of teacher educators here for the most part. I've been here now for about, 11, 12 years, I think. Spent some time at CU Denver and some other places along the way, but that's probably enough for now.
Yeah, and you've worn a lot of hats that intersect with technology and learning. And we were going to talk about online learning and the future of work as one of the main areas that we're going to focus on today. Quickly to introduce myself, in case folks don't know me, Mike Palmer. I'm the founder and CEO of Palmer Media and the host of a few podcasts, in particular Trending in Education, where I try to stay ahead of what's emerging in the world around us. That's how I met Terry. And then through Terry, wonderful things have happened. And I'm excited for this conversation. We normally begin with a little let's warm up with some chit chat section of the conversation, Terry. And I know there's lots to chat about. First off, happy birth month. I know you're celebrating your birthday this entire month, but
Right.
but can you share what the first week of your looks like you've been living it in style from my perspective, but what's been going on with you?
So my birthday is October 30th, for those who are wondering. But one of the things we did, which I know you're interested in, Mike, is we went to the Stanford Oregon Duck game, and it's like the whole game. I'm thinking, okay, so when's Oregon just going to come out and start, just running up and down the field on us? And
just to clarify, you're watching this as an impartial observer of football because you care about the game. Oh, right. No, you have some affiliation with one of these teams. Is that correct?
I do.
Yes.
Stanford.
Yes.
Go Stanford.
Yes.
Go
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, but I'm a realistic fan, right? So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, wait, we're ahead at halftime. What is this?
Right.
And at the end of the third quarter, we're still hanging in this game. So we get to the end of the fourth quarter, and for those of you who haven't seen this game, you have to go and find the highlights, because it was just the most improbable thing you think could happen. So, Oregon goes ahead, with 2 minutes left, and Stanford gets the ball on their 5-yard line. They managed to march down the field, partly through some help from, roughing the passer or something that Oregon got. We get down to the end zone. He throws the ball to the end zone, misses it. Flag, pass interference.
Yeah.
And then, on the next play, with zero time left, no time left on the clock, game can't end on a defensive penalty.
Correct.
So toss, touchdown, tie game. And
so was it Bedlam? Was it Bedlam in the stadium?
Oh God, yes. We were all. I mean, I was literally screaming for the last. So we go into overtime, and Stanford gets the ball first, and they choose. Actually, Oregon had the choice to choose either getting the ball or the end of the end zone. So they said they'll take the ball second. So we moved to our end of where all our students are, and so we go in and we score touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
So Oregon gets their turn, and it's it's one of these games. I wish I can't go into all the detail because so many penalties.
Separately, we'll talk about our sports podcast because we could clearly spend more time talking about the experience. But to make a medium-length story slightly shorter, Stanford wins. Stanford wins. You're there. You're celebrating,
screaming. Fans charge the field.
But you had already set up. This is part of your birth month celebration, so I'm excited to hear what happens next because you started here. By the time your actual birthday comes around, who knows
what's going to happen.
Kind of bedlam may be happening. But you were on campus at Stanford, Palo Alto.
And this is a good point to do our COVID check-in because Stanford Stadium was requiring people to show that they were vaccinated.
It's an outdoor stadium.
Yes. And the first game I went to, because it was smoky, we wore masks the whole time. I wore my N95 mainly because of the smoke, but people were masking and So despite the fact that we're all had to prove we were vaccinated, so
it's all becoming like a early 2000s video game hellscape. Like we're just wearing masks all the time. The zombies are coming. The zombies is probably next. But
Watchmen. Watchmen's my favorite.
Oh my god!
Precursor to all of this.
Absolutely, all that stuff. But yeah. So and then. Rob, you're more you're in Kansas, is that right? You're kind of in the middle of the country a little bit. How have things been in your neck of the woods lately?
Not too far geographically from Kansas City. We're kind of in that general area of the state. It's a pretty rural state, of course, so that's about as metropolitan as it gets around here. Things are going well. We're probably going to get to this when we have a little bit more of a discussion, but I think that like a lot of states that are rural, we are, sort of feeling some of the pinch of the demographic changes and things that are happening that are afoot. Certainly, we just got our, our 20-day reports for the state here not too long ago, and it's sobering.
Right.
It's public information. I'm not telling tales out of school, but we're starting to see some trends happening in the Midwest that are disconcerting.
And this is around enrollment numbers in higher ed.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so we're going to get into a lot of that, but hopefully with some more depth as part of the longer conversation. Also, if you want to ask questions of any of us, please enter them in the chat, and then we'll try to catch up with those questions, bring them into the conversation as we're talking as well. And then I'm over here in Brooklyn, and I think last time we were on, I'm not sure whether my son had actually started Universal 3K here in the city, but now he's actually been doing, this is his first full week of attending the 3K school that is part of the city of the public school system here in New York. So it's a nice progressive move. I think a good kind of progressive move, I would argue, in terms of what's happening here in Brooklyn. And then obviously that does come with we wound up keeping him home with the sniffles, thinking it might have been COVID when back in the day we just infected each other, and that was part of the promise of preschool. But yeah, I mean, I think there's still maybe things are maybe feeling a little better more broadly in terms of the COVID and our collective response. The Merck news was also nice to see as well, so that it looks like the immediate treatment to mitigate the risk of the most dire outcomes from the virus looks like it can be treated with a pill, which is a huge move because the vaccines, I think it's really just the injection and that whole mode and some of the history of vaccines, I think triggers a lot of people on a trust level, as opposed to unfortunately, it's not a vaccine that is a pill. Although I believe the malaria vaccine that just came out, I think that may be a pill. So I'll double check on that. But that was the other thing, just in biohealth news, like global biohealth news, which I think we're all watching more closely now for obvious reasons. But just maybe segueing a little bit into higher ed from the lens of the pandemic. Are you either of you noticing anything in terms of what the fall semester narrative is becoming now. Like we're heading into October. I've been hearing from folks who have either are teaching or they have kids who are going back to school. I know, Terry, you're doing both of those things. And then Rob, I know you have your ear to the ground and are tracking a number of different dimensions of what the fall semester has been like. Any initial impressions from either of you?
Well, from the McGill perspective, I just looked at the dashboard right before this, and they had 3 COVID cases reported, but none of them were on campus. And my son is in his senior year of high school, and they've had a few cases here and there, but no major outbreaks. So I think the news is mostly good. Is that at least in places, at McGill, they can't require vaccination, but most people, really high, like 80-90% vaccination rate.
Yeah.
They aren't requiring it at my son's high school either, for variety of reasons. But I suspect that, given where I live, which is in Menlo Park, California, I think the vaccination rate here for 12 and older is like 80-90%. So again, reaching herd immunity of sorts, although they don't think we'll ever get to true herd immunity.
Right. And that's the other thing, when you look at the map, of the world, the level of vaccination in the U.S. is much lower than many of us would have anticipated, particularly if you think about it from the supply side, where there's a surplus of vaccine availability now, and distribution is no longer a problem. It's really adoption that is the question, and then there's a lot of reasons why I think there are challenges around that. And it is interesting also when you think about the population of higher ed. I think we typically gravitate towards the idea of 18 to 24-year-olds who are on campus for the first time. Rob, I know you're also sharing a lot of stuff around getting a fuller picture of who is actually going to college and who is choosing not to go to college, which is sort of what your other point was. Can you characterize more broadly, like, what's going on nowadays in terms of who's going to college, which percentages might be surprising, and then also anything new in terms of some of the reports that you were mentioning a little bit earlier?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I just wanted to circle back real quick and echo a little bit about what Terry was talking about as well, as far as COVID. So we have a mask mandate on campus, so all buildings and so forth, everybody has to wear a mask, which is fine. We wore them and then we didn't, and then we're back into it again. So it's really not that big of a transition to go back into it. I thought it was kind of nice. Our institution is giving faculty and staff a $300 bonus for proving you're vaccinated. I thought that's a very generous thing to do, Especially, I'm not sure if it affects students, but
especially if it's retroactive, because I've been joking with my wife here in New York, the incentives are getting really, really good. And I was saying, I can still prove I got the vaccine. Can I get the check or the free admission or whatever it might be?
Yeah. No, you're right. No, when I found out about that, I was like, well, yeah, I'll take advantage of that. But just on face value, I think that the campus looks fairly normal. Exception of masks, of course, but people are milling about and activities are going on as usual. So you would really never know that there was anything extraordinary going on. It seems like it's pretty much the pace of campus has sort of returned to its normal heartbeat, and things are kind of moving along as usual. So I guess that's good. Classes for the most part, if they were scheduled to be on campus, they have maintained that schedule. They did not pivot, over to online for the most part.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was your case, Terry, or not. Did your classes, did you give the opportunity for people to pivot back?
No, what happened is we had an initial plan for, distancing and, classes above 75 were going to be online. Then we shifted because the situation in Quebec shifted. and so the classes are fuller, not as much distancing, and classes under 150 are face to face. And so that was the only shift, and they've been watching the numbers closely and to see if we need to shift back. But so far, I'm curious if Brian Alexander is out there. I'm curious because he's been kind of tracking this, whether schools are pivoting or not, or having to. And I just haven't seen as much of that in the news as we saw a year ago.
Right.
Yeah, no, we haven't either. For the most part, we're pretty much holding steady with the schedule as it was cast, and back whenever they made the schedule, and there really wasn't, I don't think, a lot of opportunity for people to migrate back to a different format for the most part, unless it was extenuating circumstances.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us to the topic of online learning, which is I think near and dear to all of our hearts in some ways. And another friend of the show, I would say Steve Jordan's, was talking about the great snapback was what he was predicting for this fall semester, that everything was that we were just kind of tired, and that we were going to revert back to a lot of the behaviors that we've grown accustomed prior to the last 18 months. And I guess the jury's a little bit out, but it does seem like that is, in fact, the instinct. Again, on a local level, I know in New York, I was expecting the public schools here to have an online option that was more integrated, so that in the event your kid had to be home for a week, that you could stream class or whatever. And to the best of my knowledge, it really hasn't been so much of that. It's been a little more, we're going to trust in the vaccine and then go back almost as a statement. We're going to go back to leveraging what's amazing about in-person experiences, not to mention the socialization and childcare function of school that I think we're all, particularly if you have a younger kid, you certainly understand that. But I do think it's an interesting time to reflect a bit on where we are, because it almost feels like there's a rebound against the characterization of online learning last year as not being up to par. So in some way, and then a desire to get back together again, in person. But I would imagine longer term, and we're talking about, a future stance and trying to understand where online learning and the future work might relate. I'd imagine this is probably as lean as we're going to be going with online learning this semester as I would see for the foreseeable future. And it's also when the pandemic is still actually out there. So I'm curious what each of you might think about the use of online right now versus where you might see it ultimately winding up in, say, the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I'll let you go first, Rob.
Oh boy, where to begin on this one? How much time is this show?
We got
all day.
Plenty of time.
Wow. Well, I try and listen to a lot of the various thought leaders that are, I think, have an ear to the ground of this much better than I do. I was listening to a really excellent webinar podcast thing from Jeff Salingo the other day, which I thought was quite fascinating, actually, and very insightful, because he really does, I think, have an understanding of what's happening, has a finger on the pulse on that broader, more national level. My personal insights are, and I'll try and be as brief as possible. I think, of course, like everybody, that this was somewhat of an anomaly. That this transition to quote unquote remote learning was awkward. I don't think it was in many cases well executed. I think what it did is it exposed a lot of the fissures that we had in being able to make the digital, what I call the digital transformation, which is a pretty common term in higher education now, make that pivot successful, having our faculty prepared for this type of a transition, which was unexpected.
Yeah.
All of those things, I think, sort of factored into the awkwardness of making that sort of a rapid transition. And I do worry that it gave online learning a black eye. I was concerned about that because, I've been in this business a long, long time, and it's taken a long time, just toehold by toehold to get, for 20, 25 years to get to where we were just before that happened. And it just seemed like that somebody just kicked us right back down the mountain again,
Mm-hmm.
and learners were recoiling at the quality and the lack of interaction, that sort of thing. So that does concern me.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that it's going to rebound in a big way. I think people in many cases have had sort of a taste of the flexibility and the affordances which come along with this.
Yeah.
And in particular, I'll draw attention to one audience which I think is pretty vocal in terms of maintaining this trajectory. That's the disabled community, the people with special needs and access needs.
Yeah.
They had suddenly now a lot of attention in having content converted and made into formats which were readily consumable by them. And when we have gone back, they're like, no, wait a minute. we were doing pretty good in that format, so we want you to continue with that. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversation kind of swirling around that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree that's been a big component. And, I've been doing a lot of things online even before COVID, as part of my company, Brighter Higher Ed and Brighter Professional Development. But, I wasn't quite sure what to expect going into teaching mode, I have over 200 students.
Right.
And it's actually worked out much better than I expected. Students raise their hands and ask questions, and and it doesn't bother me to see a blank screen of just names. A lot of people, I need to see. It's like, actually, no, I'm fine with it. It hasn't been a problem. And I'm finding, I'm getting that, and even students are coming to office hours. They're asking questions. So for me, it has been not, in some ways it's better.
Yeah.
Because I know that and even before back when I was at the University of Texas, I would post my PowerPoints before the lecture. So students aren't sitting there scribbling away. For a while I was working in a classroom where I had, at that point, I had over 200 students as well. And we had a deal where it wouldn't record my face, but it would record the PowerPoint and the voice on the lecture. So, and then they would post that. Right. So I've been doing something hybrid. UT was doing hybrid years ago.
Right.
And, I'm finding, like this week was midterms and my students had an assignment. So the numbers of students attending the live lectures is not a lot. It's about 50 to 60 out of the 200. But then, I also know that they're going back, they're watching the recording, they're coming to office. So for me, it's helping me think through, what does this look like going forward? If I'm having the classes this big, I'm probably going to ask for recording, being in a classroom where I can record and kind of give students that option.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was watching The Chair. So as prep for this podcast, I did watch The Chair, which, Sandra Oh, kind of like mythically portraying the chair of the English department at Pembroke University. It was pretty entertaining. It was fun. David Duchovny was a nice refresher towards the end, helps it get across the finish line. But it was interesting, like some of the narratives that are portrayed there around, aging tenured faculty who are getting disrupted by the older guard within the administration who want to refresh their cast, if you will, to be able to enroll more folks. And that's why Duchovny is appealing in that context. There's a little bit of a leap here, Terry, but stay with me. In some ways, you're kind of like a Duchovny character. I'm going a little too far here, but you're ready for this new format. McGill hired you for a reason, and I think it's not always going to be as easy for folks to navigate. Just being able to teach effectively is hard enough, and then if you are going through whatever's going on the other side of the webcam, we don't know. People are juggling new challenges in their lives. It's really hard for a lot of faculty, and that's why I think the fact that you figured it out to some extent. Like, what have you learned, and how do we pass this on to more folks? And Rob, I'd love to hear a little bit from you there too, because I think
Rob is really the expert on this.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, well, you've been doing it a lot longer than I have, and I would say that from my perspective, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have been horrified at the idea of teaching online, even though UT was starting to do it at that point in time. And like I said, I mean, all they were doing for me was just recording my voice and my PowerPoint. So it wasn't like I was, but it's a very different thing to be in this space of online teaching where I'm sitting in my house, talking to, potentially 200 students, and trying to keep them engaged. And but what I figured out is that it's not that different from trying to keep them engaged in the classroom if you're willing to allow them to interject and ask questions and put a little dynamism into what you're doing. And I would do it differently if I was starting from scratch, and I would, because we do have, so I have TAs and we have conferences, and so I don't do as much discussion as I would do. Like next semester I'll be teaching in person, so so it'll be a different thing. But if I were teaching, say, this 80 student class, I would probably divide them into 2 groups and try to have more of a discussion oriented class. But anyway, that's
But it is interesting. I mean, like, it is a time to reinvent and explore other modes of delivery. And I think, there's still a little bit of fear from last year that, like, you just want to make sure it doesn't break. But I feel like that, hopefully that starts to subside over time. And Rob, I know you're someone who's been experimenting and tinkering with different forms of online learning over the last 20 years. So you probably have overcome a little bit of that fear, so you're comfortable with that experimentation. But what kind of new stuff do you see on the horizon? Where do you see it working? Any tips to folks who might be watching around how to deliver great online learning?
Well, boy, it's sort of a work in progress. I think I don't think anybody really has the silver bullet on that just yet. I think we're all sort of trying different things, and I think what works for one person may not necessarily work for the other, and vice versa. I'm teaching a class this semester that is mostly international students, and what I have found is that they have that's an audience that in many cases have to, or required to, sort of statutorily or whatever, they have to take a certain number of courses face-to-face, that kind of thing. It's just kind of in the protocol with the international student guidelines, that kind of thing. But for the most part, they have requested that more of their content be delivered asynchronously or be delivered online. So they have sort of, I think, become acclimated in part because of the COVID transition. But I think that they like having the flexibility that online affords them, and being able to juggle all of the the pressures that they have, which, that's something I hope we'll touch on at some point. I think one of the reasons I think online holds so much promise is the fact that our students, and Selingo touched on this too, there are so many pressure points on students right now that we're just not necessarily truly tuned into. One of them being, some of the factors which are associated with childcare. I think you mentioned a little earlier, and holding down multiple jobs and all these types of things, and food insecurity and housing insecurity and all these different sorts of things, which I think a lot of us are sort of blind to a lot of that. And I think that this is going to hold a lot of promise to still provide an opportunity or an outlet for those people to be able to take those types of courses and continue their educational pathway.
Yeah, and I want to jump in on that, because that brings us back to the point that somebody put on LinkedIn about students with disabilities as well. So we've created we've created access, is what we've done, that's always been a component of online learning, is access for people who have different challenges, whether it's disability, whether it's they need to work and they don't have flexibility in their schedule, they have kids, whatever it may be. And, one of the things we've been talking about at McGill is this issue of access. How do we need to be serving a variety of different communities, from not just from the perspective of, the access in terms of disability or parents, but just people who can't come to the campus,
Yep.
but they still are capable of and should have access to what McGill has to offer, or what any institution has to offer. And the question for higher ed is, are we willing to make that pivot to say, we have something that people need, and we could be offering it to more people if we were willing to have more flexibility in the way we are offering instruction. And so that is something that we're going to be exploring going into the future, because, it's so funny. I know enrollments are declining, but they're declining because of cost, and because students don't have, they're just like, is it worth it? And so this comes back to the next point, are we training students to enter the future workforce? And, are they seeing value?
Right. Well, and also, and then what do they get out of it is the other piece, where, there is the 4-year degree, but I think the combination of access to online and, decoupling the monolithic 4-year degree from the way I continue to stay fresh and update my profile, update my skills throughout my life. The notion of the 60-year curriculum is an interesting idea that relates to that. Like, if you were to reimagine the mission of post-secondary education to provide 60 years of education to its citizens, how would you refactor it? Because in reality, a lot of that post-college training is assumed to be picked up either by the individual or the employer. And that's the other space where we are seeing a lot of alternative models starting to emerge out of, whether it's a boot camp or whether it's Google's standing up its own, come when you're a high potential 18-year-old, we'll train you so that in 3 years you'll have a full-time job with Google. Those models are interesting. And I think they are challenging the traditional model of higher ed. And I think that's kind of where I saw you coming from, Rob, in terms of the enrollment numbers being in some ways, maybe a wake-up call, but it's not always clear who's listening and who's ready to respond. Do you have any perspective on that, particularly if you think about maybe breaking apart the degree and starting to think more about the credentials and the just-in-time education and some of these other components that may emerge and can really be easily delivered online?
That's a great question. I want to just harken back to an interesting story that may put this in perspective. Years ago, I was at a conference. I can't even think of which one it was now. It's been so long ago now. But the keynote presenter, this had to have been 20 years ago now. The keynote presenter at that time was kind of put the fear of God in us with this prognostication that Disney University was coming, that Disney was starting its own university branch, and they were going to be coming for our students and this and that. And we, you better watch out because they're going to do this. Well, it really never did, as we know now, never did really materialize like we thought it would. Is today different? Because we're hearing a lot of the same, hand wringing about, Google you, that kind of thing. I'm not sure it's, obviously we're in a different day and age and time, and the conditions are much, much different. I think the factor that and Terry, I'm sure will agree with me on this. I think we're starting to see now are some major demographic shifts that we didn't see 20 years ago. I mean, there was a pretty constant flow of students. We could pretty much go to the bank that we knew that we were going to have a certain number of students every semester, that kind of thing. If we had, a mild uptick or downtick, it wasn't going to really affect, the bottom line that much. But now I think we're starting to see some pretty dramatic changes in terms of the shift and the shift downward in particular. I think the demographics and the demographic changes, along with the costs that Terry indicated, are two of the major drivers which are starting to, I think, influence some of our decision making. And I think that we're going to have to start to think as institutions about we need to break the mold of this calendar based format, this 16-week format of courses and schedules, which, by the way, nobody can tell you where the 16-week format came from. If you ask anybody, they won't be able to tell you.
Yeah.
The genesis of that is sort of a mystery, but we've sort of adhered to it for all these years like it's gospel. That format of, this is how we package and deliver our content and our courses and our curriculum, and you either like it or you don't. You're not cut out for our format, whatever the case might be. Sort of, it's very binary. Those days are over. You cannot do that. We have to start offering now students, I think, a cafeteria of options that they can pick and choose.
Right.
Be that compressed format options, alternative pathways, stackable credentials and stackable degrees. These I think I mentioned accelerated. There's going to be, I think, a plethora of different sorts of options that we need to start to entertain to give students more opportunity to complete the degree in the way that fits their lifestyle the best.
Right. And I would add to what Rob said that it's ridiculous in this day and age that a student should leave an institution of higher learning with no credential. They should have something that, they should be able to, have something that says, here's what I learned, even if I was only there for a year or 2 years, some kind of micro credential, 4-year institutions should be offering AA degrees, all of that. It's funny because we've seen the other direction where community colleges and junior colleges are starting to offer 4-year degrees, but we need the opposite. We need so much, but but what I think is really critical is that the demographics are shifting. There's fewer 18-year-olds who are going to be going to college, but there's more and more and more people who need what higher ed has to offer.
Yes.
And we need to package it in a way that makes sense, that they aren't going into debt, that they are able to get because I'm sorry, a liberal arts education is skills based. It's now to be honest, I've changed not just because of I'm teaching remotely and because of COVID, but with what I have learned over the last few years is, to really think about pedagogy and how the assignments I am offering are giving students the skills they need going forward. So in my class right now, I'm having my students they have the option because people learn differently. So I'm giving them, first of all, giving them options on what kind of assignment they want to do. But secondly, saying, well, if you think writing is critical, you need to be able to write a persuasive argument about something to, so the assignment is, pick a minister or a legislator and write something saying why they should change their immigration policy. And, so they learn how to write something that I'm telling them be extremely concise, because no employer or legislator or whatever wants a 10-page paper on research paper. They want you can do the research and write that up, but then you have to distill it into 1 or 2 pages. So that's what I'm working on is trying to make sure the assignments I'm giving are real, right? It's something that they can take later on and say, if they do well on it, say, hey, this is part of my portfolio when I go and talk to an employer.
Yeah. And what are those skills? And I had an interesting conversation with Jason Baer out of Loyola Marymount the other day, where he wrote a book called Deep in Thought, which is about training kids really in intellectual virtues and intellectual character. And I found that language to be really helpful when we're trying to get at stuff that gets a little more fuzzy. Like when you say critical thinking, like, what do you really mean? Like, what's your aspiration there in terms of those benefits, where things like curiosity and humility and intellectual courage, those are some of the things that you're trying to teach. And I found it really inspirational because it also made me reflect a little more on, like, what are my values? Like, what do I actually believe in? And then I think once you have that sort of foundation to your approach to engaging with the folks you're trying to teach, it allows the tactics to be more in service of that. And I think frequently liberal arts educators are really doing that. I think they are in some ways trying to inculcate some sense of higher purpose and pursuit of learning and pursuit of that sort of 60-year horizon to my development as a person. So yes, I've been mixing between those kinds of conversations and watching the chair as preparation.
Can I bounce off of that?
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to interject here real quick before I lose it. So I would wholeheartedly agree with what Terry was indicating earlier. One of the things that I think we have to be a little bit concerned about, or at least keep our ear to the ground, is as there's this shift to workforce development type of curricula that's starting to, I think, surface now as being very popular. One of the things, and that would be things like, computer programming and, a lot of those types of skill sets. I think, we're going to start to see, starting in 2025, this dramatic shift toward automation and machine-based learning and AI. So a lot of those jobs, in many cases, which are sort of oriented toward the tech sector, or workforce development type sector, a lot of those skills are going to go away. Those jobs are going to go away just simply because of automation. Truck drivers, look at what's happening with truck drivers and automated trucks. So a lot of the skills which I think are native to technical colleges, technical areas, I think a lot of those we have to start to pay close attention to starting in 2025 and beyond is what's going to happen there. So in other words, where I'm going to long-windedly is the liberal arts degrees, they provide, I think, more flexible learning and more autonomy. You learn how to learn, to use an old term.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Those skill sets you can adapt to anything. You can take that skill set really basically anywhere because you can sort of reapply it. You're not pigeonholed into one particular type of activity, which may go away in about 3 or 4 years. So it's actually a stronger skill set. People don't think of it, but it really is.
Yeah, but that's why we focus on the core curriculum.
Although I would add the digital humanities as maybe the clarification there as well, where or digital liberal arts, although that's too many adjectives in a row, unless you're freestyling. But I do feel that there is a benefit to the cognitive development and the intellectual development that happens through the liberal arts. But if it is almost a little bit Luddite in its orientation, where technology is dangerous and technology is going to disrupt us in a way that will put us, at risk. I think that's the thing to sort of smooth over, because I do think there are opportunities to provide a great liberal arts education that is leveraging some of these digital tools. But I do see a lot of folks within academia who are, in particular, it's not just on the chair, not just the English department headed up by Sandra Oh, but there is a tendency among some academics to not want to lean into the digital revolution that we're in right now. And
but I think that's a false dichotomy, because we need an array of teachers, and they're going to use different modalities. So I think it's a question of what modality are you using. I don't think it's a question that some people are embracing digital or not.
I think some people aren't, though. I think there is a reality out there that not everyone has as much digital readiness on the academic side.
And I'm just saying that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Well, I think there's a point where it could be.
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about being able to go online and teach, that's one thing. But if you're saying that their research has to some way, there's different ways to think about it, right?
Sure.
So, yes, there was a lot of resistance to going online and to doing, how we're doing it and so on and so forth. And, do we need an institution that only has faculty who are very expert at, online learning and all that? I'm not sure. There's a lot of value in that faculty member who's been there for 30 years and is not necessarily, savvy with teaching online, but we can, they can do it. With some resistance, but I don't like to see it as a dichotomy. It's more of a continuum of people.
Yeah, I agree, but we are talking about the future of work. So I'm just trying to understand what's the future model of this job design for an academic going to look like? How much will we be able to hold on to the ideal of the tenured university professor who's doing a little bit of research and then teaching some small sections on campus, when you think about the return on that versus the return on reaching a much larger audience who might need that a lot more, not to mention how much will need to be delivered live versus could be delivered in new ways. So I may be circling back to what you were talking about, Rob, in what ways are teaching and academic pursuits, how is that role going to evolve by, say, 2025? As you start thinking about automation, how will automation come into higher ed? What types of educators will be best positioned for the future of work, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. Mm-hmm. And then how do you stay out ahead of the game if you're trying to, develop a good posture?
Well, I hate to crawl out onto this branch too far, because I've done this before and got myself into trouble when you start to do a lot of forecasting in the future. But I do think the signs are there that I think we are probably, in many cases, not all. I mean, I think that we have to sort of look at the segmentation of higher education, with the research universities and community colleges and so forth. I think some of those institutions are going to be impacted to a greater extent than others. The R1s, for the most part, have they're somewhat immune to a lot of these
they're insulated from it.
Would you agree with that, Terry?
They're endowed. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, just by the nature of the beast, that they really, I think, can afford to not necessarily make those transitions as rapidly as others. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of vulnerable institutions out there, particularly smaller regional universities and community colleges in particular right now are really getting hit real hard. Privates, small privates, parochials, those types of things. Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to be faced with some really difficult decisions going forward. I think that they are going to have to start to look at, in my opinion, humble opinion, I think we're going to have to start to look at faculty in order to scale the programming and to be able to get those to meet a critical mass. They're going to have to start to look at faculty as subject matter experts and start to think about outsourcing a lot of that design, development, hosting, and delivery of the actual curricula. Mm-hmm. The way the model works now is that the faculty, for the most part, at most institutions, do everything from soup to nuts. They do the mm-hmm. whole thing. They design, develop, deliver, do the whole thing.
Yeah.
You can't scale that model, and you certainly can't continue on that trajectory, because you're talking about dwindling class sizes. So you can, you're going to have a person teaching to 4 students, before long. Mm-hmm. That just doesn't work. So I think what we're going to have to see are those people tapped for their subject expertise, and they will probably, in many cases, work with some sort of a vendor or a purveyor to help to do a lot of that lift, that course lift for them. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to see a lot of institutions start to look at outsourcing content. One to keep an eye on, and I don't want to get too far down this again either, but like Coursera, and I'm not putting a plug in for Coursera, please don't get me on that, but they have Art Levine indicated at the ASU GSV Summit that they added 25 million users during the pandemic. That's more users than all of higher education enrollment combined, all of them. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to see them as being kind of one of many major possible players in this spectrum that a faculty member would be kind of contracted to work with somebody like that. Yep. And they would actually do the content creation, design, development, hosting, and even marketing in many cases. Right. That's, I think, we're going to start to see.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I think, the reality is higher education is already a segmented market, right? I mean, the question is what's going to happen to the institutions that Rob was just talking about, the community colleges, the private, the small privates, everybody. We're all, I mean, if you look at who's kind of leading the charge, I always mention, Southern New Hampshire University and Arizona State, and UT Austin has been doing a lot around, there's the university innovation, I forget what it's called, the universities are doing innovation. There's a group of like 15 institutions that are mm-hmm. Trying to lead the charge on this. So it's not like higher ed isn't, it's funny because I feel like a lot of times people think, oh, higher ed isn't paying attention. No, higher ed is paying a lot of attention. and it's just that it's, we're an aircraft carrier. We're not a pilot ship. We're an aircraft carrier that's trying to make a shift, and it's happening. It's been happening for 20 years. I mean, the institutions that are out in the lead are the Arizona States and other institutions that have said, we're going to teach more students and we're going to charge them less.
Yeah.
And that's the position they have taken. And, it's been a lot of top down, but now you're seeing, that it's bearing fruit. And, I'm not saying every institution has to go that direction by no stretch, but I do think we need to see, more institutions talking about access, talking about how do we, for a Canadian institution, reaching Indigenous communities, making those connections with K through 12, making sure that students are prepared, developing the first generation, the bridge programs, the programs that are attractive so that students feel if they are going to come to campus, they're welcome. If they aren't going to come to campus, are we doing the outreach? Are we setting up the satellite offices so that even though the students are learning online, they have somewhere physical to go so that they can have that connection? And if they want, but there's going to be, it's so funny because we do this in the context of, parents desperate, I'm right in the middle of this right now, applying, we're trying to get our kids into the best college we can and all of that. So that's not going away. And it's not because, I know Keel talks about, employers, but it's more about, kind of, we have this, it's like a tradition, right? Almost. It's like, I went to college.
Cultural institution. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my kids should go to college, and only 30% of us are going to college. And so do we need to increase that? How do we increase that? How do we, or should we be doing what's been happening, which is pushing down into K through 12 and getting more kids access to college level material in K through 12, kids coming out of K through 12 with an AA degree, but what's the quality? That's what I worry about, is the quality there. Yeah. And so, I really think that we have to get in a situation where we are. So I, as a parent, can say, well, I have options. I can go to community college, or my son's really only interested in learning how to create video games. So maybe he goes and works, for a company and takes some courses at night. There's so many different ways to, and I come back, I always have to come back to, just this idea of ongoing professional development. I mean, we're doing work around DEI at my company, Writer Professional Development, because we know that people, need this kind of certification, but it's also about, providing options. I know that there's lots of things I did. Another thing I would just throw out there before, because I want to get this in before we finish, is that it's not just for, people, even faculty need that ongoing professional development. Absolutely. And so we need to build into the culture a better, conversation and options for faculty who do want to upgrade their skills or need to upgrade their skills in various ways. And there's not enough incentive for faculty to do that. Right.
And they need help, which I think gets back to your point, Rob, that these other services, there'll be a service layer between faculty and the way their online delivery happens in many cases. And it sounds like even some of the instructional design elements, some of the front loading of lesson planning and getting your syllabus together and some of those kinds of things. Is there any risk that we wind up dumbing down what is expected of our academic leaders, our faculty, and what do we need to expect from them in response to some of the challenges that we're facing these days?
Boy, that's another great question. I do worry about that. Actually, I think that in the scramble to shore up finances, sometimes I think institutions are a little bit, ready, shoot, aim kind of thing and are trying to, throw anything out there that they possibly can just to sort of, get the revenue balance sheet to balance again. Yeah. So I do worry about that. I do worry about the quality sometimes of those types of programs and those offerings. And, if the institution is looking internationally on a more of a global scale, I think that introduces a whole another set of challenges which go along with that to ensure quality and how that's delivered in country, wherever it happens to be. I did want to circle back one thing real quick before I kind of complete that thought. It kind of gets back to something Terry was mentioning earlier, but she's heard me say this, and you too, I'm sure, Mike, have heard this as well. But in our little state here, we have less than 3 million people. We're a very rural state. I think I counted, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 25, 26, 27 physical institutions in the state, six regents, universities, and metropolitan university, and so forth. A number of community colleges, number of privates. That's just the physical locations. And then, of course, you have all of the major players, the ASUs and that sort of thing, which are starting to encroach on that as well. That's a lot of higher education opportunity for people in a very small state, which demographically is changing. It's becoming older. And it's actually trending downward. The population is actually trending downward. Yeah. I mean, the economies of scale are just not there. I mean, you don't have to be a mathematician to figure that out. And so some things are going to have to change. Now, do I expect all of us to become MOOCs to compete with Western governors? No, we can't. That horse is out of the barn. There's no way you're going to be able to compete with that. But most students are actually drawn to an institution within about 150 mile radius of that campus. It's sort of that name brand recognition. So I think institutions are going to have to look at increasing their footprint and being able to offer courses and programming to students on a wider swath than the physical campus that many of them are doing right now. That's the only way they're going to be able to sustain and perhaps grow, particularly in rural communities, which are declining in population. So,
and probably connect into whatever business activity is also whatever is prevailing in the employment sector in the same, like new models, I guess. But Terry, we're getting close on time, and I know you have plenty of amazing ideas still. Yeah.
Well, I just want to comment on some of the chat we've gotten, which, I agree with a lot of what's being posted. And I think that we just need to take a step back and say, are we, I always come back to, are we serving our students? And I don't mean just the 18 to 24-year-olds. I mean, the lifelong learners, the people who need what we have and who want what we have. And so I don't believe necessarily that we need to move away from the residential college campus. Some kids need that. And I'm frustrated that we have this situation where young men are choosing not to go to college or dropping out of college. That's another factor we haven't talked about. And, people need, and if anything, as somebody's commenting about the misinformation going on, we need people to be educated in a way that allows them to be careful consumers of. We just had a discussion on, we're starting to use Twitter Spaces now, and there was a discussion about with some of folks in the media about how we need to focus on creating spaces where people can learn how to be better consumers of social media, of how to be online and parse through what's being shoved at us in some instances. So it gets to a broader question of how as a society do we put these pieces together, and I'm seeing the discussion is out there. And so it's we need to be thinking about what do we really want to offer, and who's getting access to it, and how they're getting access to it, and do we want to broaden the pipeline, but also create a pipeline that lasts throughout somebody's career. And it may be that it's kind of the ASU model of expanding on campus, but also working with employers like Amazon and others. And so anyway, there's a lot
and alumni, Terry, because alumni will not only show up to your football game, but they'll probably stay affiliated with your university for their lifetime, and maybe even pay for that. Or there are other models that can emerge I think when you get a little bit broader in your perspective, we got really broad in our perspective. And look, the hour flew by. Look at that.
It did very quickly.
Rob, thank you.
I feel like we just scratched the surface.
Just scratched the surface. Thanks. Ethel Merman once said, it's better to sing one song too few than one song too many. And I think we delivered on that. Hopefully folks had a good time. Rob, amazing. This is your second appearance. I think you're getting better. I think we might need to now that you're getting in a groove, we might need to get you back on again.
Wow, I'm starting to feel like one of Johnny Carson's repeat guests now.
Terry, always a pleasure. This was great. I think we're at time, right? You want to bring us home with any closing comments? You kind of
no. We'll be posting our next discussion soon. A lot of it's depending on our schedules these days, which are a little crazier than they have been in the past. So, but we'll get something scheduled very soon to continue this discussion. And if folks have ideas for what they want us, if there was a topic that we touched on today that they'd like to see us, continue the discussion, please post. You can post on my LinkedIn or on this is going to be a recording now on LinkedIn Lives or LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So thanks. And it's been wonderful. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Bye, folks.
Bye.